Welcome. This is Mr. Perry. We'll continue now with post-war America, the Cold War, civil rights movement, and beyond. We did an initial reading of this series, and we'll continue there. Right after the war, Western Europe and parts of Asia were in ruins, and poverty made it easy for the USSR, which is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, to spread to communism. And it started in Eastern Europe and spread throughout Asia. The United States, capitalist country, wanted to keep Europe capitalist. So in 1948, it created the Marshall Plan, a European recovery program, gave $15 billion. And the USA and USSR started having tensions. So the USA created NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that in 1949. And the USSR created the Warsaw Pact in 1955. And those organizations were created to look out for their own best interests. So we have the two pacts. We have the NATO alliance here, and we have the Warsaw Pact countries here. Well, that created a Cold War, as it was called, and that went from 1947 to 1991, and it officially lasted until the USSR fell apart, and it was called a Cold War, and both sides supported countries going to war with each other, and such wars were called proxy wars, and two of those such wars, one called the Vietnam War, and the other was called the Korean War. And both sides competed against each other through the arms race and through a space race. And here we see another world look at countries in the NATO Pact and countries in the Warsaw Pact. So we had the Korean and Vietnam Wars, or the proxy wars. And even though the USSR and USA never declared war, they both supported countries that were in civil conflict. And such countries were Korea and Vietnam, as we were saying. And the Korean War started when the communists crossed the 38th parallel line and tried to claim all of Korea. And in July of 1953, after 5 million lives were lost, both sides agreed to stop fighting and split the country in two at the 38th parallel. Let's take a look at that. You can see right here, visible line, which was the 38th parallel on the map. And here is the leader, Kim Il-sung of North Korea, who later became the father and grandfather of two leaders after he died. Well, once again, we have these proxy wars. We have one more, the Vietnam War, which was from November 1955 to April of 1975. And Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader, took over northern part of Vietnam, and he was supported by the USSR. And the U.S. supported South Vietnam. And there was brutal combat tactics taken by both sides. Napalm, flamethrowers, massive bombings, and burning of villages. And the communist Vietnam won, in some respects, in April of 1975. And America pulled out of Vietnam. Some 58,000 American soldiers died, 3 million dead overall, including soldiers and civilians. Let's take a look at Vietnam. And you can see we have countries which are next to it, which are Thailand And we have Cambodia down here. And we have Laos over here. And here are pictures. You see American soldiers here in rice paddies, and they fought a lot of battles in rice paddies. Here are soldiers with the RVN, or Republic of Vietnam Army. And here we have the Vietnam War Memorial, which has the name of every soldier that died in combat in Vietnam. Well, as part of all of this was an arms race, and after World War II, the world knew about the power of nuclear weapons. Both sides needed to show each other they were more powerful than the other. USSR and USA began creating thousands of nuclear weapons. Military spending began to rise in the U.S. Now, the U.S. spent some $8 trillion, that's trillion with a T, on the military throughout the 45 years. The creation of nuclear warheads was scary to the public. In schools, they would have nuclear bomb drills, and bomb shelters were created everywhere. The United States created upwards of 30,000 nuclear warheads. The USSR created upwards of 40,000 nuclear warheads. And here is a graph showing the different levels up here. Russia at 40,000 and the United States at 30,000 over here. Well, protesting and counterculture. Many people in the U.S. began questioning the actions of the U.S. government. Many people did not like the U.S. involvement in Korea and Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos and Thailand, and the creation of nuclear warheads. People began protesting these actions in large groups regularly from the 1960s into the 70s, and sometimes the protests would be violent and deadly. Kent State in Ohio in 1970, the National Guard fired upon a crowd of Vietnam War protesters, killing 4 and injuring 9. And the Woodstock Music Festival in Bethel, New York, became a defining event of the era, and that was in 1969. Many famous musicians came together to protest the war, and some 400,000 people showed up for the event. Let's take a look at that. Here we have the Kent State protests, where 4 people were killed, several people injured, and, of course, the Woodstock Festival. And we have the popular international symbol for nuclear disarmament, also known as the peace sign. Well, the economy during the Cold War. Now, after World War II, many soldiers were in need of assistance, and Congress created the GI Bill, that was in 1944, to help send soldiers and veterans to college. They figured college-educated veterans could now afford homes. Suburbanization, with more people able to afford a car and a home, people began moving out of the city into neighborhoods outside of the city, into newly formed towns. And Mr. S gives you a good example here. Maplewood, a St. Paul suburb, wasn't a city until 1957. So there you have it. You have part 2 of this series. You got plenty of questions, but not too many. You can get it done. And let's get it done. Hit it and quit it.